We've all heard of women's intuition, right? Well, men have intuition as well. Intuition is so important when it comes to feeding ourselves and our families in our challenging food environment. This podcast explores a variety of topics related to a powerful, evidence-based eating framework called intuitive eating that integrates instinct, emotion, and rational thought. My hope is that it will help you finally break free of the perpetual diet cycle. This is the Men's Intuition Podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Men's Intuition Podcast. As always, I am your host, Jeff Ash, and as always, I am glad to be here to talk to you about another important topic that I think hopefully all of you will find very interesting and helpful. And I think it's something, today's topic in particular, I think is one that all of us have struggled with at some point. If you haven't, I would be shocked. And that is, I'm struggling with managing hunger. So I think all of us can relate to that to one degree or another, especially if we've been on diets in the past. Hunger during the dieting process is a very common issue and often is the reason that many people just can't sustain diets for a long period of time. And of course, we've talked about that in other episodes, the issue with dieting, and we'll be talking about it more going forward. But today I want to focus our attention on some practical ways that we can address hunger in the context of intuitive eating. So first off, what is hunger? Let's just kind of review that very briefly here. Remember, it's the body's completely normal, something to be expected. It's built in. It's a survival mechanism. It's the body's completely normal and necessary drive to seek food for energy. So it's our body's way of telling us that it is low on energy or running low on energy or potentially going to be low on energy. And it gives us those signals, that biological drive to go seek out food so that we make sure that we provide the body with all the energy that it needs. So again, it's a survival mechanism. Now, sometimes that drive is going to be just for food in general. We're just hungry and I need to eat something. You know, I had a guy, this is kind of gross, but a guy I used to work with, he used to say, I'm so hungry I could eat a bowl of lard with a hair in it. And I thought that was a very vivid description of an extreme level of hunger, right? I just can't imagine eating that. But since this is a guy's podcast, right, I guess I can talk about some of that gross stuff, right? Anyway, other times it's going to be specific foods, right? So sometimes it's going to be a taste for a certain flavor profile, maybe a certain ethnic type of food, or we want sweet or salty or that kind of thing. And that we might think, might refer to that in terms of appetite more so than just hunger, right? So our hunger is that drive to get food, and maybe our appetite sort of guides us into what foods sound good at any given point in time. And that can be related to our body's needs for particular nutrients, and or it could just be related to an emotional state. Lots of different factors can come into play there. We'll probably address that down the line also as well. But different things are going to impact hunger, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And so one is the amount of available energy. So how much have we had to eat today? But also how much did we have to eat yesterday, even the day before? So those factors also play an important role in how our hunger is going to be impacting us today. And so it's not just about what we've had today, but it can be a cumulative effect in many ways as well. How we navigate the world on a day-to-day basis is also going to play a role in how we manage our hunger. Types of physical activity. We know that physical activity can be very helpful in regulating appetite so that our appetite matches the needs of our body. And so we're going to be talking about that a little bit. And then finally, food choices. That's also another way that we can manage our hunger throughout the day, is making food choices that align with our schedule, what we have planned, and what our body needs for the day. So we're going to kind of break this down into just a couple of categories, I guess. So one would be non-food related, and then the other would be food choices. So non-food related is going to be things that relate to our hunger and our appetite, but not directly related to food itself. And then, of course, food choices. So let's dive in. All right. Well, when it comes to non-food related things, there's lots of different factors that don't involve food directly. So physical activity, as I mentioned, is one big one, and it helps to regulate appetite. We see this play out in in practice. I see this with clients when they report back when they've increased their physical activity or added physical activity into their life. They often find that it helps to regulate their appetite better. We also see this in scientific studies. So plays out in both worlds there. It helps all the systems in the body to just function at their best. And so it would make sense that when our body is physically healthy, that our appetite regulation system is probably going to work a little better. Interestingly enough, this also is true regardless of the size of your body. So regardless of whether you're short, tall, skinny, fat, in between, whatever the case may be, your body is going to benefit from physical activity when it comes to appetite regulation. It's great for mental and psychological health as well, too. And again, this is played out in just observation, day-to-day life, in my own life, in working with clients, and then also in research. A number of studies have looked into this and found the significant benefits to our emotional and mental health of physical activity of all kinds. So whether it's formal exercise like cardio and resistance training, which has some powerful benefits, just additional physical activity in general, moving your body more is going to be beneficial in that way. And of course, our mental health, our emotional health, our psychological health impacts our appetite and our food choices and how we relate to food. And so you can see how this all ties together quite nicely. Sleep and rest is another one that I think is often very underrated. Sleep has been shown in a number of studies to have a direct impact on appetite, and this is acutely and chronically. So sleep deprivation has this powerful impact on appetite. And when I talk about sleep deprivation, I'm not talking about like dramatic, we kept them up for 36 hours or something like that. A lot of the studies that have looked at this, we're talking about 5 or 6 hours of sleep instead of 8. And there's a significant difference in how the appetite responds over the course of even that next day right after the sleep deprivation, and then chronically if you are chronically sleep deprived. So it's really important that we think of these other factors when we're talking about managing our appetite, because it could be food related to some degree, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But these non-food related items have a powerful effect too, directly on our appetite, but also indirectly, as I said, like with our emotional, our mental health, these kinds of things, which can then trickle down to how our appetite is regulated throughout the day, our relationship with food, which can then translate to how our appetite is regulated throughout the day as well, all kinds of factors like that. So my main point in bringing up these non-food related items is to really emphasize the fact that so much of this is related to things that don't have anything to do with the food that we eat. It's really easy when we're talking about nutrition and eating to get hung up on the food itself, but there's so many other factors. All right, let's dive into some food choices. Let's talk about this because I think this can be a really helpful area when we're trying to manage our hunger throughout the day. So before we do that, though, I do want to kind of give you some important reminders before we talk about food choices. First of all, remember, if you haven't listened to the first episode of this podcast, you might want to go back and do that. I outlined the 10 principles of intuitive eating, which is the framework and the approach that I use when working with clients, that I use in my own life, and that this podcast is geared toward. So if you haven't listened to that, a lot of what we're talking about will make a lot more sense if you catch that first episode. So make sure and go back and listen to that. Especially this first reminder, which is give yourself unconditional permission to eat. That comes from principle number 3 of making peace with food. And it's a super important principle of intuitive eating and of developing a healthy relationship with food. And so if you need more information on what it means to give yourself unconditional permission to eat, definitely check out that first episode. Won't go into detail here. So I guess that's maybe a little teaser to get you to go listen to that one. But also as a reminder, and part of that unconditional permission to eat is that there are no good, bad, or healthy or unhealthy foods in and of themselves. Obviously, if you're allergic to something, if you're celiac, you need to avoid gluten. You know, if you're allergic to peanut butter or peanuts, you probably shouldn't eat them since it could kill you. You know, those kinds of things. But there's no good or bad foods in and of themselves. Sugar is not bad in and of itself. If that's all you eat, well, it's probably not particularly great for you, but neither is eating just broccoli or just asparagus. You think of the healthiest food in your mindset, and I put that in quotes, healthiest food that you can think of, even something that's categorized as a superfood, which I hate that term, but that's for another discussion. But think of that, and what if that's the only thing you ate? Well, you're probably not going to be any healthier than the person who only eats sugar, to be honest. So keep in mind, too, that satisfaction plays an extremely important role. This is another reminder as we're going to go into talking about these food choices. So don't ever discount satisfaction when it comes to those food choices. It has a very powerful impact on our appetite regulation and our relationship with food. Your economic status is also going to play a role here in food choices. Some people just don't have the economic means to choose as many foods as other people might. They also may not have access to certain kinds of foods on a regular basis. And so again, these are factors that we need to consider. It can be frustrating for some people, but it's also something that we need to just accept and do the best that we can with what we have to work with. Always, always, always better to eat if your body needs it than to not eat. So keep that in mind too, as we're talking about food choices. It's better to eat something if you're hungry than nothing. And it doesn't really matter what it is, unless it's poison. Obviously, that would be silly. But if all you have access to is a candy bar and you're truly hungry and your body is needing some energy, eat the candy bar. That's better than not eating it because you have this idea that, oh, candy bar is not healthy. I want to eat something healthy. And if I can't, then I just won't eat. That's not a good way to approach managing our hunger. And it's really not a good way to approach our relationship with food. So I did want to remind you of that. And also keep in mind that food choices should be made in the context of respecting and caring for our body. So always think of that when we're making our food choices. Think in terms of, okay, I'm making this choice because I care for my body. I'm trying to take care of myself and what's going to suit me best in this given moment for the needs of my body at this particular point in time. Addressing our specific needs at any given moment is going to vary from day to day on what's going to meet that need. And so we need to keep that in mind as well. All right. So food choices. Another reminder here before we get into the 3 points that I wanted to make. Intuitive eating is not just go with the flow in the moment. So that plays an important part in this discussion also. Mindfulness plays an important role when it comes to our food choices too. Having a general plan in place can be really helpful. So some people like to do meal planning. Unfortunately, that's been kind of co-opted by diet culture. The picture of the person who prepares every single meal for the week, weighed out and measured perfectly, calorie counted, macro counted, and their refrigerator is full of Tupperware containers. Nothing wrong with that inherently, but if that works for you to plan out your meals ahead of time, then that's great. It can become, though, a rule or a way of restricting and limiting yourself, and so that can be a problem. But in general, having a plan is not a bad idea. So keep that in mind. Don't let the fact that a lot of dieting plans have this rigid plan structure in place to deter you from planning out your meals because you're trying to get away from that diet mentality. Keep in mind that's just that may be beneficial to you. It may be helpful for you. Flexibility is super important as well. Keep that in mind. We always want to be flexible so that we can adjust on the fly as necessary and adjust to those disruptions that inevitably pop up day to day in our life. And I just heard this quote on another podcast: intuitive eating is a path, not a plan. So keep that in mind. I love that quote. It's not a rigid plan telling you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, but really it's more of a path that's guiding us through the process of nurturing and developing a healthy relationship with food. All right. So I had 3 different things I wanted to touch on when it comes to food choices. So first off, consider your energy needs for the day first. This should be first and foremost when you're considering and thinking about food choices. Doesn't matter if your car's fluids are fresh and topped off and premium quality. If you don't have any gas in the tank, your car is not going to do you any good. I mean, other than maybe as a roof over your head, right? But it's not going to go anywhere if you don't have fuel in the tank, and our bodies are the same way. You can give it all the perfect, the best nutrition quality that you can possibly consider, all the vitamins and minerals, but if you're not giving it the energy it needs, that's not going to do you any good. Is it a normal day? This is another thing to consider when you're thinking of your energy needs. Is it a very highly active day? Do you have any exercise or athletic endeavors planned or rescheduled or scheduled? Do you have any non-exercise types of activities that are in the works for that day? So are you going to be on your feet more? Maybe you're going to be on your feet less. That's another consideration. It's not always just more. Also, we may find ourselves sitting in a class instead of your normal active, like labor-intensive job. And so that would be a consideration where you can say, well, I probably won't need as much energy over the course of the day because I'm not going to be doing as much. All of these things can kind of come into this consideration of your total energy needs. Are you going to have opportunities to eat when necessary or what you're normally accustomed to? Like, are there going to be long stretches without a solid meal? And so those would be things that you want to consider, again, when you're thinking about your energy needs for the day. So you want to make sure that you're giving your body all the energy that it needs. And these are some, there's obviously more things that you could consider here as well, but these are a few things to hopefully get your mind churning a little bit and get you curious in thinking about how you can meet those energy needs over the course of the day. And then, of course, choosing food options that are going to help you in that regard. Number two is what food options will be available during the day. This is an important consideration too, right? Are grab and go options going to be needed? Are you going to need these quick kinds of snacks or food options that you can eat kind of on the go, because whatever the case may be, however your day is structured, what you have in the works, what's on your calendar, you may not have your normal sit down lunchtime for 30 minutes or an hour. And so you have to come up with some kind of grab and go option. Will you have the opportunity to choose foods that you typically find satisfying, or will you be limited in your options? This is another consideration as we're thinking about food choices, because if you are typically eating certain foods that you find satisfying that carry you over from meal to meal, but then a day comes in where you know that you're not going to have access to those foods, then you may want to think about how to structure that day a little bit differently. Will you be able to eat to fullness at each feeding opportunity? This is, again, something else that is important to consider. Carbs and fat are generally quite prevalent in just about any scenario, but what about protein? So, you go to a vending machine, you can see a lot of options for lots of calories, lots of energy, lots of carbs and fat, but often there's not much in the way of protein in those vending machines. And so is a vending machine going to be your only option for getting a snack? That could be a consideration as you're thinking about other meals over the course of the day, other snacks over the course of the day. Maybe think about the protein content. So again, these are just things to keep in mind that all fall in line quite nicely with the intuitive eating approach, because what we're doing is, again, we're focusing on what are the needs of my body? How am I going to best meet the needs of my body today? And by thinking through some of these things, this isn't a long process. It's just a few little considerations, and then we kind of go about our day. What minimally processed food options might be available to really help sustain me throughout the day? So there is some interesting research looking at the difference in the impact of kind of ultra processed foods. Think your prepackaged foods and mac and cheese and chicken nuggets and those kinds of things versus minimally processed foods on our appetite. It's not that one's better than the other. It's not that we should avoid processed foods. So I kind of hesitate in bringing that up here, but it is an important consideration because it's just the fact that they impact our body's appetite regulation system and how our body compensates for that energy later. Since it has an impact, it's worth considering when you're thinking about, hey, what food options are going to be available throughout the rest of the day? So how might I compensate for a less than ideal day? So this is my third point that I want to make. Well, let's look at some examples that are kind of related to those first two main points that I made there. So, for example, what if breakfast is not going to be the most sustaining on a particular day, but I'll have ample opportunity to compensate for that later at an early lunch. So we may have donuts for breakfast. That's an example for me. If I eat donuts for breakfast, which I do sometimes, they don't sustain me very well. And so in that case, I tend to need to eat lunch a little bit earlier, and that's okay. What I'm saying is that what we're doing is we're making food choices, food decisions throughout the day based on what our body needs. Now, I know going into a day, if I eat donuts for breakfast, I'm probably going to need to eat lunch earlier. And so I plan for that ahead of time. I don't say, oh, well, donuts aren't as sustaining as my normal scrambled eggs and oatmeal, so I'm not going to eat them. Or donuts are bad, that kind of thing. It's no, I'm in the mood for donuts. I'm going to enjoy those. And I'm just going to adjust my day to compensate for that in a way that's going to help me to really manage my appetite well. Another example is may have to skip lunch. That's not uncommon, but I should have time to include a couple of decent snacks, and I'll be able to eat my dinner early enough before hunger gets ravenous. And so that may be another case where you say, okay, I'm going to have to skip lunch. And instead of stressing about it, just say, if I add a couple of snacks in here, plan my dinner a little earlier, I can manage this well and I can take care of that. And so again, just thinking through those little changes, those little adjustments that we can make throughout the day, in the context of caring for our body, can have a powerful impact. A final example here is dinner is going to be really late today. Maybe I can push lunch a little later. Make sure it's hearty, and then mostly minimally processed, and maybe add in an extra late afternoon snack. So again, we know this going in that dinner is going to be late. We know we're not going to be home until 9 o'clock to eat dinner, and that's much later than we normally eat. We know from past experience that when we eat that late, we tend to go to that meal really, really hungry, which makes it really difficult to eat in a kind of controlled manner, I guess, during that meal. And then maybe we find that we just, after dinner, we still are just hammering on the snacks afterward as well. And then maybe when we go to bed, we don't feel as good because we have so much food in our stomach. These kinds of things that sometimes pile up, where if we made slightly different food choices earlier in the day, whether it's the timing of meals and snacks or what we end up feeding ourselves, we can compensate for that issue of that late dinner relatively easily, and then not have to deal with those feelings, those uncomfortable feelings. And also, especially if we're somebody who is feeling frustrated, if we tend to get down on ourselves when we make these sorts of food mistakes, in a sense, I put that in air quotes, then this can be a really helpful approach to take. Just stop, pause, think about it a little bit, and just make those food choices based on what you know is coming down the line. All right, so let's wrap up this episode. I did want to keep it nice and short and to the point. Hopefully you got a few decent examples and some practical ways that you can manage your hunger better over the course of the day. Remember that hunger and fullness are two key principles of intuitive eating, so it makes sense that we would want to learn to manage our hunger over the course of the day. We want to honor our hunger. That means when we're hungry, we want to feed our body. We also want to recognize fullness so that we know when we've had enough, because our body tends to function best when not only do we give it enough, but we also don't give it too much or more than it needs. Managing our hunger helps us to eat the amount of food that's going to be right for our unique body's needs. And so that's why it's a really important skill to develop. And that's why it's a key component of the intuitive eating framework. Some things are not directly food related, like sleep and physical activity. And these things can, again, as we talked about, impact our hunger. So I would recommend that if you are not getting adequate sleep or getting adequate rest, that you implement those if at all possible, because that in and of itself may immediately help you to better regulate your hunger over the course of the day. Not to mention, you're probably going to just feel better in general. You'll probably be a better worker, a better husband, a better father, better partner, all of those things that sleep can benefit us, all of those different ways that sleep can benefit us. Often a little planning can go a long way in managing our hunger too. And so again, remember, if we plan for our total energy needs, that can be really helpful, and plan that out over the course of the day. Think about the food options that will be available, and then make decisions based on what we know is coming down the line, and what options are going to be available. Make adjustments if we know, again, if we know that certain options won't be available later in the day that we're accustomed to, we can adjust for that earlier on in the day sometimes. And then planning for how we can compensate for those unordinary days. It can be a great help. And when we do in that planning process, again, none of this should be super complicated. I'm not saying sit down and spend 20 minutes writing out all of this stuff. Usually these are things that can be done on the fly in a matter of seconds. Dinner's late tonight. What can I do to accommodate that? What can I do to compensate for that? Boom, 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 and we're ready. And that can be done while we're getting dressed, while we're walking out the door. So again, it's nothing overly complicated. So I hope that you found this helpful. I look forward to sharing another episode with you later. Also, if you have any questions about this, any comments, any suggestions for topics to be covered, I'd love to hear from you. And you can reach me on Instagram at intuitive.eating.men, or you can also contact me at my website, hopedrivesme.com, and you can get information there. You can also contact me if you are interested in working together with me in a one-on-one fashion for you and your partner, or you and your entire family, because I do work with men, I work with women. I'm about 50-50 on that with my client base. And I also work with adolescents and kids. And I've got some adolescents that I work with as well. And so I love working with the entire family unit. I think that when you can bring together everyone and get everyone on the same page when it comes to nutrition and their attitudes and mindset around food and health and fitness in general, it can be such a powerful tool to help families grow together, and also to help everyone to develop the best possible relationship with food and physical activity and body image and all of those great things. So again, it was great talking to you, and look forward to talking to you again soon.